What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Ring Chasers brought to you by the League FFB. As you guys know, this is our playoff, or at least our fantasy football playoff series that we've been doing on this channel, trying to give you guys everything you need in a quick, 45 minutes, maybe an hour long stream. We're going to be talking about waivers here in week 17, potentially pickups that you could make tonight when your waiver wires run that could potentially help you win this week. Matchups that I like at each of the positions, matchups that are maybe some matchups to avoid at each of the positions, basically the top 8 matchups at each position and the bottom 8 at each position on paper. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And then at the end of the stream, the last section of it, we're going to be doing a fantasy football Q&A. So any start sit questions you have, any waiver questions you got, pretty much whatever you have for me, that's what we're going to be doing. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into our waiver wire section of this episode, and let's start talking about some waiver wire pickups. First waiver wire player that I think you guys need to target this week is going to be Tajay Spears. Now, Tajay Spears, he is rostered in over 57% of leagues. So I do want to make that known. He's probably going to be unavailable in about half of them. However, the chance that he is still available, he is going to be the number one pickup for me. The matchup for the Tennessee Titans this week at the running back position, it's very good for them. They do get to play. Who am I thinking off the top of my head? Can't remember. I just did it. I just did all the data. We'll talk about it in the matchup sections for certain. But Tajay Spears, he needs to be picked up. Last week, he had 10 carries, had a total of 2 touchdowns on 13 touches. This is a guy who's been involved. Tony Pollard's been banged up. I think Tajay Spears, if he's available, you should be picking him up because you do have some running back injuries this week. Guys like James Conner are going to be potentially missing this game. We'll see what happens with him. We'll probably talk a little bit about that as well in the Q&A section, I'm certain. And then there's some other guys as well that we could probably be looking at Tajay Spears as a potential pickup and play option if you need it, some desperation here in week 17 of the fantasy football playoffs. Now, another player sticking with the same team I think you need to look at picking up is going to be Chigakonkwo. He gets a great matchup this week as well, and he's coming off of a week where he went 9 for 11 for 81 yards. In your tight end premium leagues where you're getting that extra point per reception or an extra half point per reception, those 9 receptions, they're going to add up. It's a good matchup, like I said, this week. You probably need to be targeting him. There are some potential bad matchups for some of these other tight ends that we've been streaming. Potentially Zach Ertz, bad matchup. Hunter Henry, bad matchup. Chigakonkwo, I'd play him over some of these other guys. So if you have him available on your waiver wire and you're a little bit nervous about maybe the matchups for your streaming tight end that you've been streaming throughout the playoffs, Chigakonkwo would be the next guy up for me, and he's the guy that I'm definitely looking at adding. Now, looking at the wide receiver position, I think Jalen McMillan is a guy that we should be picking up. I'm looking at the last couple games for Jalen McMillan. Week 14, he was the wide receiver 10 overall on the week. Week 15, he was the wide receiver 18. And week 16, he was the wide receiver 21. He has a total of 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. I think this is a guy who's slowly starting to enter that Chris Godwin role for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he was potentially drafted as the replacement for Chris Godwin, who is an unrestricted free agent this year. I think Jalen McMillan, he's a guy that I'd be willing to pick up and play this week if you need him, if you have an injury or if you have some other things that are happening where you need to get a guy in the flex. I think there's a lot worse options than Jalen McMillan, especially against the Carolina Panthers this week. Mr. Magic, I see in the chat, he says, yo, Merry Christmas. So Merry Christmas to you too, man. Appreciate you for being here. Appreciate you hanging out. Happy holidays to everybody as well. I know it's Christmas Eve, so, if you're here hanging out with me, I very much appreciate you. Where are we at, though? Jalen McMillan, I just think he's a guy that we're picking up for sure going into this next week if you need a streaming asset. Now, the last waiver wire guy that I think you could potentially pick up is going to be Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown, he is rostered in about 34% of leagues at the moment. So if you're looking for another wide receiver option, he did step in and he saw 8 targets in this Kansas City offense. Now, they do play tomorrow, so it is a little bit of a short week for Hollywood Brown. He's not a guy that I'm like super confident in either because the matchup is a little bit tough. But if you have some leftover fab and you want to play defense, maybe pick him up, put him on your team, keep your opponent from maybe getting him. I think Hollywood Brown is probably somebody that I'm looking at. Still to be seen. I think his role is only going to increase over the remainder of the season. But yeah, I mean, this matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's going to be a little bit of a tougher one from a defensive standpoint, but he's still probably the second best waiver wire wide receiver this week if you're looking for an option. So, Mr. Magic, I see the question in the chat. Appreciate you. We're gonna get to the Q&A section here in a second, and we'll talk about all of those start sits. So Appreciate you for sticking around. We'll get to the Q&A section right after we talk about some matchups. So that is going to take us to the matchups. Those are the 4 waiver wire pickups that I would be looking at potentially. That will take us all the way over to the matchup section. So let's just hop into the matchups. We'll talk about top 8 matchups at each position, bottom 8 matchups at each position, and players that you guys could potentially be streaming this week based on those matchups. So let's hop right into it. You guys see it on the screen. If you're looking at some quarterback points above expectation, for those at home who don't know what points above expectation, that's what we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. We've been using that for the majority of the year. It's really just what that player is projected and how much the defensive matchup that they get gives up above the expectation or below the expectation on any given week, basically meaning how accurate those projections are based on the matchup. So hopefully that explains it a little bit. There are a couple players here that I want to talk about. Jalen Hurts is one of the main guys that I want to talk about. This matchup on paper, right now, Dallas is giving 2.7 fantasy points above the expectation. However, Jalen Hurts, we all know, concussion protocol, did not play that game for you. So if you were lucky enough to make the championship with Jalen Hurts still getting that game last week where he basically only played in the first quarter, it's a good matchup this week, and I'm hoping that he clears protocol. I think he is a must start, obviously, if he does get into the lineup, because it is just a concussion. It's not like it was a leg injury or whatever, a throwing arm injury. It wasn't anything like that. It's just concussion. So I would be playing Jalen Hurts if he does play. Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield, and Bryce Young all feel like really good plays based on the points above the expectation. Jaden Daniels could be a really good play. CJ Stroud and Jordan Love are good plays as well. I think all of these guys were guys that you probably were relying on through the rest of the year, and they all have really good matchups. So I think they're all good plays considering the circumstances. When I'm looking at points below expectation or teams that are a little bit tougher against the quarterback position, guys like Michael Penix, they kind of worry me a little bit. I don't know if I'd be streaming him. Geno Smith, that worries me. Anthony Richardson, Cooper Rush, these are all guys that are kind of like fringe guys most weeks anyways. And you get the bad matchups, it makes me a little bit nervous. Darnold and Goff, they both make me a little bit nervous as well. Darnold makes me more nervous than Goff, so let that be known. I don't think I'm going to be benching those guys, but I am lowering the expectations with them. And then Patrick Mahomes, he makes me a little bit nervous as well, too, with this Pittsburgh matchup. Should be a little bit of a tougher one. We'll see what happens. Like I said, we just mentioned Hollywood Brown as a good waiver wire pickup, but it is a bad matchup. That applies to Patrick Mahomes as well. So I think that there's an argument this week where, like, if you're debating between a guy like Bo Nix and Patrick Mahomes, you go with Bo Nix. If you're debating between CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes, I think you still go CJ Stroud. Like, I think he's on a fringe territory for me this week where I might be considering benching Patrick Mahomes no matter what. So it's just assuming you have the right option, but he does make me a little bit nervous this week. Let's look at the running backs, because the running backs, there are some good matchups for us to target. Again, we're looking at points above expectation. The top 8 matchups right now are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Tennessee Titans, the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Indianapolis Colts, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So what that's going to mean is Bucky Irving, Rachaad White, they have very good matchups. You see 8.5 fantasy points above the expectation for Carolina. Both of those guys, I think, are must starts this week. Even though Rachaad White is mainly just a flex play, he's a very strong flex play this week, in my opinion. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, I think we can start both of them versus Jacksonville. Even though Tony Pollard's a little bit banged up, I still think you throw him in because the matchup is great. Amir Abdullah could be a pickup and play off the waiver wire. Alexander Madison could be a play. I don't love either of these guys in my lineup anyways. Even though it's a good matchup on paper, their talent in the room is not that great. So not really looking to play the Las Vegas options unless I am super, super desperate. Breece Hall, you can play him confidently. I think J.K. Dobbins might be back in the lineup for the Los Angeles Chargers this week. The matchup is good. If he is back in the lineup and they, have him as a full participant the rest of the week, I'm confident throwing JK out in championship week. That's just the way it is for me. Jonathan Taylor coming off of a big week, throw him into the starting lineup. Kenneth Walker, you can play him. Etienne Bigsby, you can flex both of those guys. Zach Charbonnet, I put him there. You're not going to play him if Kenneth Walker is active, which he is most likely going to be active. That is, nothing's changed since last week. So, yeah, Charbonnet probably is not a guy we're putting in the lineup. I see all these questions in the chat, folks. I am going to get to the Q&A here in just a minute after we finish covering the matchups. So appreciate those. Keep them coming. I am starring them and putting them to the side so we can go through them in just a minute. Let's go to the bad matchups. Chuba Hubbard has a tough matchup this week against Tampa Bay. They're negative 2.4 fantasy points below the expectations, so that does make it hard on Chuba Hubbard this week. However, he does have the majority of the backfield. I'm still playing him, just lowering the expectations. The same thing can be said for Devon Achane. I think he lowered the expectations, but obviously he's been very, very good down the stretch. Brian Robinson is a nervous start for me. Patrick Taylor, I think you're benching him at this point. Derrick Henry, you're obviously playing. He's a stud. We don't overthink that. Josh Jacobs, stud. Don't overthink it. Dowdle's a guy that I'm considering benching this week, and Najee Harris and Jalen Warren are guys that I'm considering benching this week because the matchup against Kansas City is horrid for those Pittsburgh Steelers options, and they play tomorrow. So I think I'd bench both of those guys if I have the right options. Now let's look at the wide receiver position. The wide receiver position, there are some good matchups, starting with the Green Bay Packers. They play Minnesota. Minnesota is dead last right now against the wide receiver position. Jaden Reed should be good. If Christian Watson plays, he does have a knee bruise or a bone bruise in his knee. If he plays, he should be a fine play. Romeo Doubs should be a good play. If Christian Watson doesn't play, bump up Jaden Reed, bump up Romeo Doubs, and then Dontavion Wicks enters streaming category for me this week. Tyreek should play, and Jalen Waddle's still TBD, but Tyreek's a must start for me this week. Terry McLaurin, a good matchup. Ridley, I'm playing him. Nico is going to smash this week. I think he's like number one wide receiver overall ability. I put John Mechie the third in here, and I see we had a comment in here about thoughts on John Mechie. John Mechie this week, to me, he's a perfect streaming candidate. I think if you're looking for a guy to plug in, I think he should be the guy who's up. Deontay Johnson did just get signed. I don't expect him to get a heavy workload this week. He is probably going to play, but I don't think he's going to get a heavy workload. Mechie would be the next guy up into the Tank Dell role for me, so I would be looking at him as a streaming option. But Nico Collins should smash with this matchup. When I'm looking at guys like Adam Thielen and Leggett, we're playing them. Thielen should be a strong start. Marvin Harrison could be a strong start. Michael Wilson, I'm not really looking to play, but the matchup's good. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, I'm playing both of them. And look, I understand it could be Kenny Pickett under center. That doesn't matter to me. When Kenny Pickett was under center, it did feel like A.J. Brown was still kind of the same stud wide receiver. So I don't think that there's a huge production drop-off for A.J. Brown. It almost felt like, to me at times when I was watching this game, it felt like Kenny Pickett was leaning on A.J. Brown at times in the receiving game. So I still think he's a fine play. The matchup tells us he's a fine play. Maybe he doesn't have wide receiver one overall on the week type of upside, but he still should have a wide receiver one type of upside week here, even if it is Kenny Pickett. But something tells me Jalen Hurts is going to clear protocol. We'll see what happens. Bad matchups. There's really not a lot of guys that I think are like bench worthy. Obviously, you have bad matchups for like, let's just go down the list. MVS, you don't want to play him. Puka and Cooper Kupp, you're playing both of them probably despite a bad matchup. I can't imagine you have many better options. JSN and DK, you're probably still playing those guys. CeeDee Lamb, if he plays, he did re-aggravate that shoulder injury. You're probably looking at him. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, I'm probably benching both of these guys. I don't really want to put them in my lineup. Jefferson and Addison, you play them. BTJ, you play him. Amon-Ra, you play him. Maybe Jameson Williams doesn't make the lineup just because of the bad matchup against San Francisco. But other than that, this is kind of where I'm leaning on start your studs and not overthinking the start your studs thing. I'm just playing those guys in the lineup, and we'll go from there. Tyler says A.J. Brown was targeted more from Pickett than Hurts did all year. That's what I'm saying. It felt like there wasn't a drop-off at all, and it felt like he was leaned on. So we'll go on to the tight ends, and then we'll get into the Q&A because I see the questions starting to fill up the chat. So we'll get into those, I promise, folks. But let's talk about the tight ends, points above expectation. You're really going to be looking at some streaming options here if you have some guys that you're looking to stream. Right now, based on the points above expectation, my favorite streaming options are Pat Freiermuth, Juwan Johnson, Cade Otton, Chig Okonkwo. Those are probably the top options. Bellinger and Troutman, even though the matchups are very good on paper, you don't really want to plug those guys into your lineup. I would say JT Sanders, you're still a little bit nervous about playing him, and Noah Fant, I'm nervous about playing him too. But those guys are the best streaming options. I think Freiermuth should have a pretty solid week, and I think Cade Otton should have a pretty solid week as well. When you're looking at the tight ends that have bad matchups, there's a lot of big names here, actually. Dalton Kincaid on the list, Zach Ertz, George Kittle, Johnny Smith, Sam Laporta, Hunter Henry. Now, of these guys, basically just looking at the tight end position and bad matchups, and again, leaning on start your studs, I think Kincaid can still be played. I'm looking at him as a low-end tight end one. Ertz can still be played, but if it was Ertz or Okonkwo, I think I lean Okonkwo over Ertz. If it's Ertz or a guy like Pat Freiermuth, I still lean Pat Freiermuth over Ertz. George Kittle, you're still starting your stud. Johnny Smith, you're still starting your stud. Sam Laporte, I think you can still start your stud. But he's probably more like Dalton Kincaid to me this week, middle to low end, tight end one. Hunter Henry is the only guy that I think has kind of been a streaming option that people like. And if you do, I'm not playing him this week. I'm not playing Hunter Henry. It's a tough matchup. He is going to have to be touchdown dependent this week. If he gets into the end zone, you'll be happy. If he doesn't, I don't think that there's going to be much for you there this week. So if you think you're going to project the touchdown, you can play him. If not, it is what it is. So that is the top matchups. That is the worst matchups this week at each of those positions. Kind of some thoughts and takeaways from those, some waiver wire guys that we've talked about. But this is what you guys are here for. Let's hop into the fantasy Q&A and let's answer your guys' questions. All right, so I'm going to start it at the top. Mr. Magic was first guy in here. He says, pick 3. You got Kupp, Devontae, Keenan, Sharp, Kamara if he plays. It sucks because I have to make a decision very soon with the early games. Yeah, so with this list right here, Kamara, if he plays, obviously you want him in the lineup. I would say if he plays, he's still the number 1 guy in my lineup. Devontae has to be in the lineup. And I think I lean Keenan Allen over Cooper Kupp at this point. So for me, it's going to be Kamara, Devontae, and Keenan. If Kamara doesn't play, it's Kupp, Devontae, Keenan, Sharps on the bench. Let's go to J-Rad. J-Rad says, Kraft, Kincaid, Okonkwo, who you starting? So this week, just based on my rankings, we did already kind of talk about how good I like the matchup for Okonkwo right now. We talked about how Kincaid has a little bit of a tougher matchup. The only one we didn't really talk about is Kraft. I think Kraft's matchup is fine. I don't love the fact that Musgrave is going to be back in the lineup. So based on those, I would be playing Okonkwo. Okonkwo would be one of the top plays at the position for me. I have him as a top 5 guy. He would be the start, J-Rad. So go Chig Okonkwo. Reichard or Fairbairn? I would probably play Fairbairn over Reichard this week. I just think that there's going to be more points for the Texans there at the kicker position. So go Fairbairn. When you look at Spears or Dobbins, if he plays, if Dobbins plays, Mr. Magic, I am going with J.K. Dobbins. The matchup is good. I think he's going to get a full workload right away, assuming he gets the full practices. So keep an eye on that. I don't think Spears is a bad play at all by any means. I actually think he's a pretty strong play. But Dobbins, if he's active in the lineup for the Chargers, he's my play right away. Tyler says, I just lost Hurts, Stafford or Young. Also, Walker is questionable. I would still keep an eye on Hurts. I think Hurts potentially plays this week. If it's between Stafford and Young, just based on my rankings right here, I do have Bryce Young, I think, higher than Matthew Stafford this week, just being honest. I'm going to double check this just to make sure that I'm being truthful here. Yes, I do have Bryce Young higher than Matthew Stafford. I probably play Bryce Young, assuming Hurts doesn't play, but I think Hurts probably ends up playing this week. I think he clears the protocol. I just have a gut feeling there. And again, there's nothing really behind that, but I have a gut feeling he makes it. Colts D or Philly. Give me the Philly defense this week. Nahal says, where's this question? Pull it up. Come on. T is questionable. Do I flex Worthy or hope he plays? If he doesn't play, I have to start Tracy. And if Tracy doesn't play, I have to play a Dunze. And then he says, oh, wait, never mind. Odunze plays on Thursday, so I won't know by then. So here's the thing. I would be playing T. I would wait and see what happens. I think you're going to be able to play him. And if he doesn't play, I think you're fine playing Tyrone Tracy. I don't think Tyrone Tracy is a bad play this week. When I'm looking at Tyrone Tracy in my rankings right now, Tyrone Tracy, assuming this is a PPR league as well, just with that context in there, Tyrone Tracy is currently sitting as my running back 22. The matchup is pretty fine. Similar range to me for a guy like Tony Pollard. Similar range to me as a guy like Jerome Ford. I think you can still play Tyrone Tracy. So I just wait on T. He's your best player. And if he doesn't play, you go Tracy. Also says Eagles or Seattle defense. Give me the Eagles defense. And then he says, if Tracy doesn't play, I'm going to have to flex Amir Abdullah or Chig. I would just wait on T. I'd play Tracy if he doesn't play. We're getting into like contingency plans to contingency plans. It would be T, Tracy, and then for me it would be Chig. But I think you'll have one of those guys be fine. Alenda says need one wide receiver and one flex. You got DJ Moore, Sutton, Pickens, or McMillan full PPR. Okay. Looking at these wide receiver rankings for me this week, right now, DJ Moore, Sutton, Pickens, and McMillan all sitting in my PPR rankings. You have DJ Moore or Cortland Sutton's the highest. I have him as wide receiver 15. DJ Moore, I have as wide receiver 24. Who's the other ones? Pickens and McMillan. Pickens, I have as wide receiver 34. And McMillan, I have as wide receiver. Where's he at? It's got to be higher than that. 35. So I would go with Sutton and I would go with DJ Moore. Tyler says Hawkinson or Okonkwo. I have Okonkwo as my tight end 4 on the week. I'd be playing him over TJ Hawkinson. I think TJ Hawkinson right now is currently sitting as my tight end 5. So I would go Okonkwo over Hawkinson. And you said you're leaning Okonkwo, so I agree with that actually. Mechie, Coleman, or Vele. I would probably go with Mechie. Mechie probably has the best matchup, and I think he falls into the Tank Dell role this week. Hollywood Clown, wouldn't start him if I were you. Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily say we're starting him. I said we're picking him up. But, yeah, if you want to start him, that's up to you. Adam Thielen, Jerome Ford, Hollywood Brown. Start one at flex. I would play Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen would be my play. If Hurts doesn't play next week, who would I start? Bo Nix versus the Bengals, AR versus New York Giants, May versus Chargers, or Stafford versus the Cardinals? I'd be playing Bo Nix versus the Bengals easily. Nick says, hey, man, appreciate you being here, Nick. He says, start 3 wide receivers, Amon-Ra, Reed, Worthy, Devontae, Keenan Allen. Give me Amon-Ra, give me Devontae, and give me Keenan. Give me those 3 guys. Those would be my plays. Also have Bryce Young too. Yeah, I'd be playing Bo Nix over all those guys still. How are you feeling about the Chargers D this week versus New England? Looking at my defensive special teams rankings this week, the Chargers currently rank as the 4th defense in my rankings. So the only defenses I have above them are the Eagles, the Colts, and the Dolphins. But I think they're a top 5 play of the week. Nick says, do you start Tracy over Pollard / Spears? No, I would play Pollard or Spears over Tracy, assuming they're all healthy, obviously. Nick says, I can either play Tracy on Sunday or Worthy in the flex tomorrow. I'd probably play Worthy. in the flex tomorrow if you have those 2 options. But I would play Pollard and Spears over them. Which kicker do I start? Options I have are Fairbairn, Lutz, Reichard, and Rylan. I would be playing Fairbairn. Nahal says, why are you so low on Pickens? Really, the only reason why I'm low on Pickens at the moment is because he still is banged up. He is expected to play. The Kansas City Chiefs have also done a very good job this year eliminating number 1 wide receivers. There's a chance he catches a couple long balls. There's a chance he gets into the end zone, but I'm just a little bit nervous about throwing Pickens out there against 1, a good defense, and then 2, a little bit banged up himself. So we'll see. I just think that there's other safer options that have similar upside to George Pickens this week. Tyler says, leaning Eagles defense, but if Hurts is cleared, I would have Hurts, AJ, and Eagles defense. Is that too much? I don't think it's too much. I still think the Eagles are a top defensive play this week. Andrews or Chig. I'm going with Chig Okonkwo this week. Chig Okonkwo is, like I said, my tight end 4 overall. Would be playing him. Actually, let's just make this simple. The only tight ends I'm playing at the moment in a full PPR league above Chig Okonkwo would be George Kittle, Trey McBride, and Brock Bowers. If it's not those 3 names, it's Chig Okonkwo over everybody else this week. If Jalen doesn't play, how do you feel about Devontae? I still feel pretty fine about Devontae. It doesn't hurt my upside with him too much. Sit him for Sharp or Garendo. I would not be sitting him for Charbonnet. I think Charbonnet is, as long as Kenneth Walker is playing, Charbonnet is pretty much unstartable, to be honest. But Garendo, he would be interesting. We'll see if Garendo can play. it's still up in the air with Grendo, but I probably would still be playing Devontae over both of those guys. Christian says, also stuck between Neighbors, Reek, and Pickens, can only start 2. I would go with Reek and Neighbors personally. Do you think the Texans have enough offensive ability to get Fairbairn into field goal range? Yes, I do. I think they're going to be fine. Nico's going to have a huge day. Mechie's going to be fine. Schultz is fine. Mixon's fine. They're all going to be good. They're all going to be fine. Chig, Ferguson, or Strange, it's going to be Chig. If you're hoping Kamara plays, you need to learn how to draft better. So Corian, yeah, I mean, it's a – I don't know what to say, man. Corian's in here to troll tonight. And apparently drafting Kamara and hoping he plays in 1 week, they have correlation, apparently. I don't know what that means from Corian. But Mr. Magic says, it's hard to sit Kupp. He always does well against the Cards. I think it's tough for him, man. When I'm looking at Cooper Kupp in my rankings this week, full PPR, I have him as a low-end wide receiver too. The Cardinals are 10th best right now against the wide receiver position. And Cooper Kupp over the last couple of weeks has been burning fantasy football teams for the most part. Obviously, he had the donut a few weeks ago that really didn't do anything for anybody. That was week 15 versus San Francisco, scored 0 fantasy points. Last week, he was against the New York Jets, 3.9 fantasy points, and that puts us 3 of his last 4 games finishing outside of the top 70 wide receivers in fantasy football. He's been killing everybody, man, and not in a good way. And so, I don't know, man. I understand you don't want to sit him, but also he hasn't been good. Let's just see this. Mr. Magic says there's just no way Kupp 3 weeks straight. I'm sure Stafford is going to get him going again. That's the hope. That's the hope. But if you just follow the stats and the data, it's not great. Nick says, who is your kicker this week? Let's pull up those kicker rankings. I'll give you my top 5 guys. So my top 5 guys right now this week are Chase McLaughlin, Jake Bates, Chris Boswell, Brandon Aubrey, and Tyler Bass. Those are the 4 guys, or the top 5 guys for me in my rankings this week. I think all of those guys are going to have pretty good kicking weeks. Mr. Magic says, I don't want to play Fairbairn tomorrow. LOL, just don't like playing guys this early in the week. That's my superstition. Well, guys similar to Fairbairn in my rankings that maybe you could wait on if you have a superstition. If you're between Fairbairn and Reichard, they're close enough in my rankings. You could play Reichard. Cameron Dicker, I'd play above him. Jake Elliott, I'd play above him if you want to wait for that. Those would probably be some other options. Maybe Brandon McManus if you want to wait. But yeah. Oh, he just said it. He said McManus. Yeah, you could wait and play McManus if you're superstitious. They're close enough in my rankings that you'd be fine. Laporta or Chig? It's going to be Chig Okonkwo. I have Chig as a top 5 guy in my rankings this week, and Laporta is not in my top 5, so I would be playing Chig. The matchup's good for him. What else we got, folks? Mr. Magic says Darnold over Purdy. Darnold got a bad matchup. Yes, he does have a bad matchup. Would I play Darnold over Purdy? Yes, I think I would. Purdy, I have as a low-end QB1 this week. Darnold, I still have him as a top 8 option. I'd play Darnold over Purdy. Yes. Nick says I might pivot to Reichard or McManus. I think you can play Reichard or McManus if you're nervous about Fairbairn. They're all like back to back to back in my rankings, so I think you can go with either of them. Mr. Magic says this has to be the week for Hawkinson, right? I have him as a top 5 guy in my tight end rankings, so if it is going to be the week, it's got to be now. Hopefully, we'll see what happens with him. But right now, I'm looking at the matchup for Green Bay for TJ Hawkinson. When you look at how Green Bay plays against tight ends, right now they're ranked 23rd against the tight end position. So it is a little bit of a softer matchup for TJ Hawkinson. All right, let's keep those questions coming, folks. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, this one's a little bit shorter tonight. Obviously, Christmas Eve. If you guys are spending time with your family, I know we got family coming over to the house here in a little bit, so we are going to be hanging out with family. But still wanted to give you guys this episode of Ring Chasers. So I will also mention that as well. If you have never played on Underdog Fantasy does support this show. You can sign up using promo code League FFB. There is a link in the description. They will give you up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Lots of people excited right now because we are going to the BBM5 finals. Everybody who has a team that's qualified for that is like a tournament that is worth millions and millions of dollars, fantasy football tournament. It's easy to play every year. If you sign up using our code, like I said, they give you up to $1,000 in bonus cash, so that does help you get started. And you could be in BBM 6 next year when that starts, the biggest fantasy football tournament on the planet. It's so fun to play in. And you also get a pick'em entry that will be for tomorrow. I think it's Patrick Mahomes on Christmas. So if Patrick Mahomes goes for 1 yard, you win that part of your pick'em entry, easy money. And it supports the show, like I said. So sign up using code League FFB. Mr. Magic says, I got Aaron Jones and Jacobs. Can they both feast? Good question. Let's pull up the running back rankings. PPR. I got where are we at? Josh Jacobs is running back 11 this week. Aaron Jones is running back 15. Can they both feast? Absolutely. I have both of them as that low-end RB1, high-end RB2 type of territory. So you can play both if you want to. Tyler says, can you just explain why it's not a bad thing to have guys on the same team? I think it's a little bit overblown, to be honest. When you look at having multiple guys on the same team, really you want to look at projected game totals. How much points is a team projected to score? I think you can still have multiple guys be good. Obviously, we've seen that happen over weeks where you've had multiple guys from the same team have big weeks. We've seen it with Cooper Kupp. We've seen it with Puka Nacua. People think having both of them in the lineup is a bad thing. If you had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin early in the year in the same lineup, people thought it was a bad thing. Both of those guys were scoring. It depends on who you have. I think obviously you don't want to put yourself in a position where you might have guys against each other. For example, if you had like Saquon Barkley and you had AJ Brown, only one guy can catch the touchdown, right? AJ Brown can catch a touchdown or Saquon can run it. Now, obviously, if they're going to score 2, 3, 4 touchdowns during that game, that's fine. There's enough touchdowns to go around. However, if it's a lower projected game total for that team, and there's only maybe 2 touchdowns projected, it's tough when you're going against each other. However, when you're looking at stacks or maybe things like Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts, like you have, where it's AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts, is I think what you mentioned, Tyler. You can get 2 touchdowns for that. Jalen Hurts can throw a touchdown to AJ Brown. Boom, you get 2 touchdowns on your scoreboard in fantasy football. That's obviously going to give you some more upside. So that's really the only thing that I would bring it up as. But in your specific situation, having Hurts and AJ is not a bad thing because they're from the same team. In fact, I would actually argue that that's better because you can get 2 players on your fantasy football team to score a touchdown in one play. Nick says, Mr. Magic, we rolling out Reichard? Sounds like you guys are probably going to be out here rolling out Reichard. Mr. Magic says Sharp was a full participant and Walker wasn't. Yes, and yes, that's true. I'm also looking at Kenneth Walker. It's tough to tell, man, because he has been unavailable in some of these weeks, and then he shows up and he takes away everything. I mean, last week, we'll see how that is. But if Charbonnet is there, let's just play the what if game, Mr. Magic. If Charbonnet plays and Kenneth Walker doesn't play, where would I put Charbonnet in my rankings? I'd probably be putting him as a top 15 running back. I'd put him in the same range as like a Josh Jacobs. I'd put him in the same range as a guy like Aaron Jones. Those guys we just talked about. So you're going to have to wait and see what happens with Walker. But if it's Charbonnet and no Walker, you got to play Charbonnet. Tyler says it would be AJ Hurts and Eagles D. Yeah, I don't think that that's a bad thing. You could have AJ Hurts and the Eagles D all do well in the same game. They're not going to really hurt each other. If you're that worried, the one that I would consider sitting would be the defense. But like I said, I have the Eagles as the top 2 defense this week. They're my second best defense. So the only other options that I would even maybe consider benching them for, if you have them available on the waiver wire, would be the Dolphins defense, would be the Colts defense. But I just don't think that there's a big issue in playing the Eagles defense, even though you have Hurts and AJ. But all right, folks, it does seem like it's slowed down a little bit in the chat. I am going to say final call on the questions. Throw in your last minute questions. We'll answer these before we get on out of here and go on and celebrate our evening here. Corian says both AJ Brown and Saquon scored last week, so that puts a fat hole in your logic. Yeah, Corian, as I said, if you have a high projected game total, you can have multiple guys score. But appreciate you for being here, Corian, participating in the chat and spending your time listening to this. Tyler says, thank you. I appreciate you, Tyler. Thank you. Nate says, I got Jerome Ford going against a bad game script and a questionable QB start. I got Tajay Spears, and I have Pollard. But Pollard has been consistent but hasn't hit ceiling really. Okay, when I'm looking at these guys, the problem with Pollard and Spears is that they are going to split time if they're both on the football field. And I do project Pollard higher in my rankings currently. It's just going to come down to who gets the touchdowns. And over the last couple of weeks, it has went to Tajay Spears. Tony Pollard right now currently sits as my running back 20. Tajay Spears is my running back 23. When I look at where I have Jerome Ford, I have him higher than both of them, running back 17. So you do have that. I probably would be playing Jerome Ford. So play Sharp over Cup. Yeah, if Kenneth Walker does not play and Sharp is the only guy in the backfield, I would play Sharp over Cup. Thoughts on Mixon? Mixon has a tough matchup this week. Baltimore's been really good. I think Mixon is more so an RB2 this week. I wouldn't be viewing him as a locked and loaded RB1. The matchup is bad. Probably somewhere between RB15, RB18 is where I'm viewing him right now. Kind of the same range as we just talked about with guys like Aaron Jones potentially, or like a Breece Hall. I'd be viewing him that way. Pollard is such a frustration due to the split with Spears. It is. It's tough, and they're both taking away from each other. So despite them having good matchups on paper, especially this week against Jacksonville, they are taking away from each other, and it's limiting them both pretty much into RB2 roles. You're not going to get the RB1 week from either of them. Unless they score 2 touchdowns like Tajay did last week. But all right, folks, I think that might be it. Last one from Nick here. He says, if Pollard does play, is it still worth dropping him for Spears due to the recent slump in production and touches? In my opinion, Pollard is still above Spears, so I do think you probably got to wait for that. Mr. Magic says the problem is Sharp plays on Thursday. Right. So you're deciding between him and Cup. Doesn't Cup play later in the week? I don't think he plays tomorrow. Does he play tomorrow? Let me pull this up. Yeah, so if the Seahawks play on Thursday, then you should be able to make the Cup and Sharp decision very easily, because if Sharp doesn't play, then you just wait and play Cup on Saturday. So you should be fine there. Says, I know, but if Kamara is good to go, one of those guys got to sit. I don't know. Makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, look, you're going to get the clarification first on Charbonnet. So if Charbonnet plays, you just play him with no Kenneth Walker. If he doesn't, then the decision is pretty much made for you, and you have the rest of those guys on Saturday, Sunday. So we should have more news. Really, the only one that you really need to know about is Thursday, and then you get Friday to figure out more injuries. You can see if guys are trending. We're going to do a Q&A on Friday too. So as the injury updates come in, you'll be able to kind of see what happens. All right, and then the last one here. This is the last one. Pick 3, Tyreek, Higgins, BTJ, or DJ Moore. I'm going to go Tyreek, Higgins, and then between the other two, I'm going to reference the rankings just one time, assuming this is PPR, because I have PPR rankings in front of me. I'm going to go with BTJ. So we're going to go Higgins, BTJ, and Tyreek this week. Sit DJ Moore. All right, folks. So that is it. Appreciate you guys for being here for this episode of Ring Chasers. As always, if you enjoyed the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, do all that good YouTube stuff. Another Q&A on Friday. So hopefully we're able to answer some of those Thursday questions here today. I know that Mr. Magic's been debating the Charbonnet. We will have more clarification on that. Happy Christmas Eve. Happy Christmas Day. We'll be traveling home. I will be traveling home on Friday morning. So Friday's Q&A in the evening time will be in the normal setup. So we will have the normal setup again, and hopefully everything's all good from that. So we'll see you guys Friday. Good luck in some of those Christmas Day games and those games on Thursday. And we'll see you on Friday to answer the rest of the questions. But until then, nothing else for you today.